film, writing. All of the art sector have been hammered by this pandemic. And the idea it'll just snap back on one day is absurd, because quite clearly venues such as this that require substantial numbers of people to actually be commercially viable to hold an event won't be snapping back for some period of time. And that's why we need a government response. We've been talking about this now for months. It was one of the major points that I made in my vision statement before Parliament resumed. The government has continued to show contempt, continued to mean that people aren't eligible for JobKeeper at all. A range of people are also not eligible for JobSeeker and have no support whatsoever. These are creative people. These are people who, in the crisis of earlier this year, arising from the bushfires, gave up their talent, gave up their time, donating it back to put back into the community. These are people who've paid taxes their whole lives, who've now been forgotten by this government. We need to do much better. The government has heard from people like Philip Lowe from the Reserve Bank about the danger that is there of snapback and its approach. What we actually need is a government that actually looks at a transition in terms of, just as there's a transition back to normal activity, with pubs opening, with more and more people, we need a transition in terms of JobKeeper and support. We also need specific sector programs. And the arts and entertainment sector are one that stands out as needing support in order to maintain viability. If that doesn't happen, what you'll see is that some of the venues, and we can see here at the Enmore Theatre today, the silence that you hear is the silence that comes from jobs being lost. That is what it is. And what we need to do is do better than that. We need to make sure that venues can survive, that people will stay in the industry, because otherwise they'll be lost to us. This is important not just for our national economy, it attracts international dollars in terms of tourism and economic activity as well. If we aren't telling Australian stories to the world, they won't know about us. They won't know about us, they won't be attracted to us, they won't see what a sophisticated culture we have in this country. We have a culture that's enriched by the fact that we have the oldest continuous civilisation on the planet, right here, telling stories about First Nations people, whether through theatre like Bangarra or whether it be through stories that are told. We have that, and then we have our rich multicultural nation as well, and the sort of stories that you see on the Heights and on other programs about the nature of our urban life. We are a rich culture. We need to tell each other that story, but we also need to tell the world the Australian story as well. And it's in danger of being lost. It certainly is being undermined. And this government has done absolutely nothing to provide any support of any substance. Happy to take questions.
You must have some great memories of this place.
I do. I've been in this venue many a time, from Ian Jury to Midnight Oil, to Cold Chisel, to the Proclaimers, to artists from all over the world. Sarah Blasco, she lives just around the corner, here performing, and indeed over a long period of time. This is an example. This theatre results in an extraordinary economic benefit for the surrounding community. If you took this theatre away, you wouldn't have the thriving restaurant, pub scene in the local community that we see around Enmore. The spin-off from activities and venues like this is simply enormous. And as a result of that, you have a thriving craft beer scene and you have a spin-off as well, whether it be Cottonmouth Records up the road, whether it be pubs, whether it be Young Henry's, a bigger venue down the road. They, I think, can all derive their success from this venue. This venue costs a lot of money to upkeep. It's old, it's historic, it's important, and it's a central part and focal part of the community, just as Sydney without the Sydney Opera House is a different city. The fact is that venues like this are absolutely of critical importance. And a venue like this, which is connected with the Factory Theatre just down the road, so the artists who are either on the way up or perhaps not past their peak play down there and hope to make it to a bigger venue like this. It's an important part of who we are and our identity as well. And walking in here on the stage they also do a range of other programs. I was here with Tony Burke for Rock Whiz a while ago as well. It has a range of activities, and it is indeed a valuable asset for the community. And this is private sector risk. This is privately owned, putting their own money in. Venues like this, the truth is, don't make a whole lot of money. And overwhelmingly, most people involved in the arts are people who are in it out of their love for the arts. If you want to become a billionaire, don't go into a local live music venue as a source of where your capital goes. There's lots of other options, but it is providing an important national service, and that should be recognised.
The National Cabinet is considering moves to speed up the reopening of venues if rates of infection are low. Is it a risk worth taking?
Well, what it is, we need to always pay attention to the health advice. One of the reasons why we've been successful is we've listened to the science and the medical advice. And so far, compared with many other nations, Australia is coming through this crisis better than most. So we need to keep vigilant on that advice, but I don't want to see restrictions in place for one day more than necessary, because there is an economic cost of those restrictions, and there's also a social cost in terms of our quality of life. I'm very much looking forward to watching South play tonight as a highlight of my week. I think people want to see that interaction. We're social beings, and we've been reminded of that.
What's your response to the latest emissions data showing a 0.9% drop last year?
Well, yeah, the fact is that Angus Taylor has been presiding over a policy program whereby he's been more interested in fake documents about the City of Sydney Council than he has on his day job. The fact is the renewable energy investment figures are declining significantly in 2019. The projections aren't going in the right direction, and the government doesn't have an energy policy or a climate policy. That's not good enough in 2020, and we need a government that actually is prepared to advance forward, to have mechanisms that support policies. They put one forward in the National Energy Guarantee and then walked away from their own policy, and their internal divisions mean they're incapable of putting forward a coherent plan. I suspect that Malcolm Turnbull's right when he says it will take a Labor government to do that.
Just in the industrial relations talk, Sally McManus has expressed sympathy with employers' view that the Better Off Overall test is holding up agreements, and that argument has some merits. Does Labor agree with that, and is it supportive of a move to the keeping error no disadvantage test, where the Commission might have a bit more discretion?
Well, what we need here is cooperation. There's nothing new in that from Labor. On my first day as the Labor leader a year ago, I said that people had conflict fatigue. I've been saying for some time that business and unions have common interests. So we need to have a bargaining framework whereby we can have win-win, because productivity is going backwards for employers and wages aren't keeping up with the costs of living for employees. So the system quite clearly isn't working at the moment. What we have, though, from the federal government isn't a plan, it's a process at the moment. Now, hopefully that process of employers talking to employees should be nothing unusual about that, and it shouldn't have taken a pandemic for the federal government to acknowledge that unions have a right to exist.
Does Labor think, though, that no disadvantage test would be a suitable test for agreements?
Look, I'm awaiting the discussions which take place. What I do say is, out of any process, workers shouldn't be left worse off. It's that simple. And the fact is that what we've seen under this government over 7 long years is an increase in job insecurity, an increase in casualisation of the workforce. And during this pandemic, that insecurity has meant that those very people are the ones who've missed out on support like JobKeeper.
The Bushfire Royal Commission has unexpectedly suspended hearings today, saying additional material needs to be considered. Do you think these hearings are getting to the bottom of what happened during the fires and determining what needs to be changed?
Well, I certainly hope that they do. But at the moment, as someone who's been in bushfire-affected communities just this week, around Narooma, Bega, Merimbula, Quorma, what we're seeing is that the support isn't being delivered on the ground. And this week at the Bushfire Royal Commission and at the Senate Committee, we've heard some stories that reinforce that. The fact that $15.9 million that was allocated to provide support to frontline workers, people like the firefighters themselves, to get mental health support and other support. Not a dollar of that has been spent. For goodness sake, it's the end of May, and 4 months after grand statements from the government, not a single dollar has been spent. It's simply not good enough. These people should not be forgotten because of the pandemic, because they've suffered from drought, then the bushfires, and then the pandemic. And what we know from the evidence that's been given is that the government was complacent in the lead-up to the bushfires. All the warnings were there of what was going to occur over this period, and yet it took the calling of a by-election in Eden Monaro to get an announcement about increased aerial firefighting support.